Hey everyone, welcome to another live stream. Jumping on Thursday evening here as opposed to the typical Tuesday. So thank you for accommodating the change in schedule. But excited to go through a couple of examples that have been submitted of late by you, students who want some feedback on your essay responses, draft responses for other modules. Might be a creative writing piece, might be Section 1, short answers, anything to do with English, questions that you've had. I'm going to be going through those this evening. I've got a couple of examples that have been submitted by some of you. I've got 2 essay-related responses, which is no surprise. They are definitely the most common ones that come in. And we're going to break those down. I'm going to give you some practical tips on how you can improve your work, what it takes to get close to full marks, if not full marks in a response. And I'm going to try and show you that in the best way that I know how, which is to take actual examples from you and give you some guidance on how you can elevate the quality. So I'm going to get into that in a second. Just going to see if anyone else is tuning in, because obviously we're not doing the typical Tuesday slot here. Most of you are probably watching the recording of this. So if that's the case, I'm going to get straight into it. So I don't want to leave you waiting. Remember, if you do have something that you want feedback on, whether it's an essay response, creative writing response, anything that will help you prepare for your exams, or just a question in general, maybe it's an assessment task, something that you want some feedback on, then submit that using the link below our live stream videos on YouTube. There is a link in the description that will allow you to submit a response. Don't submit a full essay or anything like that. We won't look at it. We don't have time to go through full things, but you can submit a paragraph or general questions and assessment information that you want some feedback on. So I'm going to get into it now. Let me know in the chat if you have any questions as we go through this, but let's jump into a couple of student submissions. I know students in New South Wales have the trials coming up predominantly on the other side of the break. Some students are already doing some pre-trials assessments this term. Some students have just done an assessment on one of the modules or one of the units. So it's a busy time right now. If you're coming up to the break, then you're probably gearing up for a big kind of study period to get ready for that big set of exams around August. So let's jump into it. I'm going to share the screen and break down some responses here just to give you guys some practical tips. But again, if you have any other questions, put them in the chat. So put myself down here. Great. Let's jump in. So I've got one submission here. This is on 1984. It's the common module. Don't worry if you're not doing the specific text. Pay attention to the feedback because it will no doubt apply to whatever text you're doing. But this is a common mod 1. The essay question here is analyze how Orwell represents the collective experience. I'm going to mark collective because that is a key word of poverty and political ignorance. Interesting. So it's a very specific question in terms of the themes. This is what you call a theme-based question. And notice here, the first thing I'm doing is highlighting the 3 key words, which are obvious. Collective, poverty, political ignorance. They are the terms that you need to use all throughout your essay. You need to pepper those in. Not even pepper, you need to flood your essay with these, but pepper them in almost every sentence. You don't have to use all 3 per sentence, but you should try to use at least 1 or 2 of them, especially in the introductory sentences and the topic sentences. Remember that when you get 2 key theme words like poverty and political ignorance, 2 concepts like that, you don't want to ever put them together in your response. The question has grouped them together using the word and. You are never allowed to use the word and in your response, okay? You need to actually show the relationship between poverty and political ignorance. You need to show how those 2 things are connected. This is talking about 2 collective experiences, collective experience of poverty and political ignorance. So we need to break those down and show how one of these potentially causes or leads to another. You always want to try and find a cause and effect relationship between 2 words like this, 2 terms. But if you can't see a cause and effect relationship, and sometimes you might see a cause and effect relationship each way, which is amazing if you can see that, and you actually have evidence to back that up. But sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes you can't see the cause and effect relationship either way. And in that case, you might just want to break them down individually. Here's how I'm breaking down poverty as a collective experience. Here's how I'm breaking down political ignorance. But the best responses will typically draw a connection between them, and it's typically a cause and effect relationship. So just remember that if you get a question that has two key terms like this one. Okay, moving on to this student's response. Their introduction comprises 3 sentences. So I've broken up the 3 sentences that make up the introduction here. And 3 sentences is okay. 3 sentences that are concise and directly respond to the question is sufficient to hit that band 6 mark. I typically advise 4 sentences. 5 sentences is possible, but 5 can get too bulky. And, in the context of an exam where you only have 40 minutes, I would be trying to get as close to 4 sentences as possible. 4 gives you enough depth. 4 allows you to impress the marker, cover some context, cover some form, cover the key ideas you're going to introduce. But as soon as you go 5 or especially 6+ sentences, you probably could reserve that information and be unpacking it more in your body paragraphs. So 5 sentences max. 4 is amazing if you can do it in 4, but 5 is absolutely fine, especially if you're going to break up your thesis into 2 smaller sentences or break up any kind of point into 2 shorter sentences. Okay, so that's on the structure. 3 is the bare minimum here. Otherwise, if you have 2 sentences for your introduction, it's just not going to feel comprehensive enough generally for the top band. So 3 is the bare min, 5 is our max, 4 to 5 is kind of that sweet spot. First sentence, George Orwell's storytelling through its tripartite Swiftian satire form. Interesting. So this student's really loaded up on the adjectives to characterize the type of text, right? It doesn't actually say that it's a novel, which is interesting. First and foremost, it is a prose fiction novel. Yes, it is satirical. It is dystopian as well. Swiftian satire, that's very precise, kind of risky, given it's such a refined kind of definition. That's Swiftian comes from Jonathan Swift, who is a really good writer of satire. But yeah, I think this is a little bit unnecessary to have all of this. You don't get bonus points for just jamming in 3 words to do with form here. And I think you've kind of missed the key part, which is that it's a novel. We don't want to miss that. So when you group these, I would just use probably 1 or 2 adjectives and then save the other ones to tie into other parts of the response, because you're not really putting any emphasis on these terms at this point. All you're doing is just lumping all of these big buzzwords together, and they might all be applicable, but you're not kind of giving any weight to any of them. You're just kind of grouping them, and they don't really mean much when they're presented like that. So we would rather just introduce a couple. Maybe you want to go with, satirical novel, right? George Orwell's storytelling through, and then you say it's, which doesn't make sense, through the satirical novel form. I mean, it's kind of funny to say form at the end like that. Why not just say George Orwell's satirical mode of storytelling in his novel? You don't need to overcomplicate here. George Orwell's satirical mode of storytelling in his prose fiction novel 1984 effectively represents the impoverishment of society. So you've hit impoverishment there. And I'll just, not to confuse it, these were things that I thought were a bit superfluous, too many words. Effectively represents the impoverishment of society. Now, if you refer to poverty, yes, you need to expand on the word, and you can use a derivative of the word like impoverishment. But just saying of society is kind of vague. Doesn't that sound quite vague? Of society, impoverishment of society. Can you give me a type of society or an adjective here? Represents the impoverishment of what type of society? Okay, caused. I try to avoid the word caused as a general rule as well, because you can always give, you can usually give a far more specific causal term. Like it might be engendered by or incited by, created by even. But cause is so scientific that I would try to avoid that one and look for a suitable replacement. Just like how you never want to really use the word shows when you do analysis. Like the metaphor shows, there's usually a better one. The metaphor depicts, the metaphor reveals. And markers typically have a bias against those kind of words. Here, I just feel like the scientific nature of it, even though we want to in our heads think of cause, this causes this, cause and effect, absolutely. Best to try and use a word that might have a little bit more flair to it. It doesn't have to be too fancy, of course. So the society caused by one's rebellion against ideological loyalty. So you're saying that when you rebel against ideological loyalty, when you go against an ideology, then you're impoverished. Interesting. And you can see here in this particular thesis here, you've just focused on the poverty part. I can't see the political ignorance coming into play here. Remember, the best responses would actually draw a connection between these two. And I'm at the moment in reading this, I'm kind of interested to see where you're going to go, because you're actually saying that by rebelling, you become impoverished. What do you become impoverished of? And this is the what type element here, right? This is a good tip for all of you who want to try and do better at answering the question and impressing the marker with how well you can answer the question. It's always better to be specific when you use the key term. So when you say poverty or impoverishment, what type of impoverishment? How are they impoverished? You haven't given us even a general sense. It's the first sentence, so you don't want to be too specific, but you haven't even given us a general sense, categorically speaking, of what you are actually referring to here, because I'm quite confused by this. I would have thought rebelling against an ideology could actually be quite nourishing, the opposite of impoverishment. It could be spiritually nourishing, but it could be socially alienating. You could be impoverished and starved, so to speak. Good to take a figurative approach on these words. You could be starved of social connection because now you don't belong to the tribe, because you're not conforming to a herd, not talking about spices and herbs here, a herd mentality. Okay, so if you don't want to be part of the tribe, part of the herd, and think and act the same as everyone else, then you don't belong here. And that's the risk you take when you go against the status quo. But that is also the price you must pay to earn your agency and freedom back. If you want to be free and act as an autonomous individual who can act with agency, you can actually say what you think and behave in the way that feels commensurate with who you are, so you can be authentic. Then if everyone else is conforming to a particular set of values that you don't agree with, that's going to mean you're alienated from them because you guys don't have anything in common and you represent a threat to their worldview. And when someone doesn't agree with someone else's worldview, unless you have openness, you will typically divorce yourself or disconnect from that person. So interested to see where you're going to go with this concept here, because I'm not fully on board yet because it hasn't been specified enough in terms of what you want to say. Subsequently, Orwell unveils physical poverty. Okay, see here how the student's actually saying the type of poverty. And I'm just saying the student, sorry, because I don't have the name on me. We've got physical poverty. This is what I mean by having a type of the key term there. Physical poverty as a collective experience of individual freedom. There's a lot of words there. Let's see if it actually makes sense. Physical poverty, so you're physically impoverished. I guess even what does that mean? Because normally when people think of poverty, they think you don't have any money. They think financially poor. Physically poor. Now I'm thinking you don't have certain biological elements, or you don't have physical items, I guess materially poor. It's still not clear to me. That's not a super clear term. As a collective experience of individual freedom. A collective experience of individual freedom unveils physical poverty. There's a lot of big terms in there. Again, the idea is just not clear enough for my liking. I really don't know what the point actually is. So you've got the words in there, but it feels like you're jamming them in and you haven't thought out the point and you're not articulating it in the way that you probably intend. Or I'm just missing the mark here, which is entirely possible. Whereby people are acclimatized with fear of constant surveillance in the face of a totalitarian government exhorting us to greater political vigilance so we can preserve it. Okay, see, there's a lot of big words here, and I like big words a lot of the time because it helps you be more concise. If you have the right word, it saves you from saying a lot of the wrong words or words that aren't as efficient. However, we need to make sure the whole point is crystal clear. You talk about physical poverty as a collective experience. Okay, so many people could be physically poor. Again, I'm not sure what you even meant by physical poverty, but that's okay. So it feels a bit jammed in there. As a collective experience of individual freedom. Are you saying that people, yeah, again, are you saying that people are going to be penalized for trying to be free? Could be some merit to that. Whereby people are acclimatized with fear of constant surveillance. Yeah, for me, these points are just a little bit too disconnected. And because you've got 3 clauses with a final imperative to say Orwell is encouraging us to be more vigilant so we can preserve it. I guess you mean freedom. If we want to preserve our freedom, we need to be vigilant. Yes, okay, that's what Orwell wants. So that part is good. Sure, that's the intent. For anyone watching, this is authorial intent. Absolutely. However, I'm not clear on the first 2. People are acclimatized with fear. Yeah, again, you're trying to kind of jam that word in. It doesn't quite sound right with acclimatized. People are acclimatized to a fear of constant surveillance in the face of a totalitarian government. See, constant surveillance in the face of totalitarian government, those things are too similar. I would probably just pick one, whereby people are acclimatized to a fear of constant, you could just say totalitarian surveillance, because it's just getting a bit wordy, to a fear of constant totalitarian surveillance. I don't even know if you need a comma there. And then this bit doesn't connect to that. So that bit, I think you need to do a lot more with, or you need to be a lot clearer about what you mean there, because it feels jammed in and forced, and not sure how physical poverty has much to do with anything, because it's not explained. There's no reference point to the novel. Like, you haven't referred to anything in the text, insofar as I can see. You just say totalitarian government. You don't mention Big Brother. Acclimatized to a fear of, you could even say Big Brothers. Now, you could keep it conceptual and not even say Big Brother, but it's nice to have a couple of subtle textual references that make it clear you are referring to the story that is being played out in the text, because you do talk about storytelling. You talk about satire. You said it's a Swiftian, 3-part Swiftian satire, but then you're not referencing that again. Ultimately, Orwell's representation of an absence of autonomy, an absence of autonomy, sure, sparks political ignorance within a false political narrative given by Ingsoc. And like the Ingsoc end in it's a little bit anticlimactic, because it's such a specific textual reference, and it's like, that's your big finisher for your introduction. So referencing Ingsoc with a false political narrative, referencing that's a good textual reference, what we were just talking about. If that's the big ideology you want to talk about, that's great, include it, but I wouldn't necessarily end your whole thesis with it as if everything leads up to Ingsoc, okay? Because that's so specific, I wouldn't finish with that word. But if you can tie this in elsewhere, then that would achieve that goal of having some specific textual references, even in the intro, just to set the scene. So you could say to a fear, whereby people are acclimatized to a fear of Big Brother's constant totalitarian surveillance. Ultimately, Orwell's representation of an absence of autonomy sparks political ignorance within the false. Yeah, maybe we could extend on this, within the false political narrative of Ingsoc, or false political ideology, or you've said political here, sparks political ignorance. The absence of autonomy sparks political ignorance. Yeah, because people can't think for themselves, they don't really know what's going on. They don't know the power structures by which they are being controlled. That's true, within the false political narrative. It also works vice versa. Like, you can't get your autonomy back because you are politically ignorant. So you might want to talk about the paradox here that political ignorance deprives individuals of autonomy, while an absence of autonomy perpetuates one's state of ignorance. And that could help you separate yourself if you can really engage with the question on that level, where you're actually able to point out a paradox. You're pointing out a paradox about the concept of political ignorance, which was one of the key terms of the question. Political ignorance deprives individuals of autonomy, while an absence of autonomy perpetuates one's state of ignorance. Okay, that could be a good finisher for you if you wanted to really unpack that concept of political ignorance and why it's important. It's important because you can't get your autonomy back. And if you can't get your autonomy back, you're going to stay ignorant because you can never speak up, you can never act for yourself. So think along those lines for a more precise thesis. Extend this a little bit longer if you can, but I would probably look at just rewriting that with that in mind. And then I want to make this point to everyone. If you get a question that has two key terms like poverty and political ignorance, as I said earlier, the best thing to do is to form a relationship between them, ideally in your opening sentence, to really impress the marker. You can still introduce the text. You don't have to have a concept only first sentence where you just talk about that relationship generally, because the question is directly about Orwell. So you can jump straight into introducing the text here. There's no problem with that start. But when you say represents the impoverishment of society, we would rather get impoverishment and political ignorance in the same part. So let's see what we can do to improve this thesis. I'm not going to include the first part, but let's go to represents. Orwell represents, assuming you did the formalities up here in the right way. Orwell represents. And what's the connection? Let's think about the connection. This is what you need to do. And you can do it quickly in the exam by having practice doing this. Poverty, political ignorance. Okay, what type of poverty and how does that relate to being ignorant? Well, I think if you are politically ignorant, let's keep it very simple. What's the cause and effect direction? Political ignorance will lead to a type of poverty. What type of poverty? Well, you're going to be impoverished of ideas, of freedom. So okay, so it is that, I guess that's what you might mean by physical, in the sense that you aren't free to move in the way you want to. Just physical sounds a bit funny, as I said, but it's also an intellectual or psychological freedom. I think psychological poverty is one of the most pertinent types of poverty in the text, because people can't even think for themselves. And that deep psychological penetration of Big Brother's ideological narrative, that political narrative, is what makes it so hard to rebel. So political ignorance, we'll get into the next layer after, but let's start with political ignorance leads to a kind of psychological impoverishment, to use the terms here, a collective state of psychological poverty. Now you might want to explain that. Psychological impoverishment, whereby individuals, the collective, can no longer, you need to actually explain what you mean by this, because this is your chance to define how you're interpreting those key terms of the question, whereby the collective can no longer think and act for themselves, right? Act for itself, right? Where it is, or whereby the collective is let's say subject or constrained by or limited by, whereby the fate of the collective is invariably determined by an oppressive totalitarian force or power or government. Something like that, okay? Now, political ignorance is dangerous because it leads to that, right? So if you don't understand what's happening to you, then you will become psychologically impoverished. So I would go for more the psychological element. It doesn't mean you have to agree with that or focus on that. You could do this physical as long as you can define what you mean by that. So the difference between this students where they said physical poverty, they didn't actually say what they meant. It wasn't clear to me what you meant by that. Whereas if I say psychological impoverishment, then what I'm at least going to do here is explain it, whereby the collective can no longer think and act for itself, whereby the fate of the collective is invariably determined by an oppressive totalitarian government. That doesn't even really explain the psychological aspect, to be fair, so we could do better here, whereby you could say kind of capacity to think, whereby the collective's capacity to think, to reason, right? Whereby the collective's capacity for logic or for critical thinking, for critical thought, because critical thought is psychological, and that's also intellectual, whereby the collective's capacity for critical thought is invariably constrained or limited or inhibited by an oppressive totalitarian force or government. Okay, now we're starting to get there. So this is the kind of relationship that we want to be thinking about. Which way does the cause and effect relationship travel? I think here the ignorance leads to the psychological impoverishment because now you can't think for yourself. You don't know what's going on. It also is a self-perpetuating problem. So if the more ignorant you are, the worse the state of poverty becomes because you can never get out of it. So it's a self-perpetuating cycle. That's the paradoxical nature of it, of political ignorance. There's a self-perpetuating, if you really wanted to extend yourself here, these kind of terms that you can add to the key term, add to political ignorance by saying a self-perpetuating cycle, that this thing is just going to keep getting worse and worse over time, the more ignorant you are. If you don't know what's going on, you're going to get taken advantage of. Political ignorance allows you to become exploited, taken advantage of, and that will starve you of your freedom. And that's not even a bad line in itself, right? Ignorance towards one's, if an individual, the greater one's ignorance towards the political actors or institutions that control them, the greater one's ignorance towards the political actors that control them, the more they become starved, impoverished. I'm using starved because of that impoverished or poverty word. It's good to use words that tie in with the key terms where you can as well. The more they become starved of their intellectual and psychological probably covers it, but you could say psychological and social freedom. There's lots of terms you could do. You could just do the one. I like the one for impact, especially early on. So we've got ignorance, and then we've got starved, and we could say impoverished. Okay, so the more they become psychologically impoverished or the more they become starved of their psychological freedom. This is the kind of concept or thesis that you want, where you link the two key themes together, okay? And it's easy to get the collective thing in. I mean, the greater one's ignorance towards the control of them, the greater the collective's ignorance, the greater the collective ignorance towards the political actors that control a society, the more it becomes, the greater the collective ignorance towards the political actors that control a society, the more it becomes starved, the more people, the more it kind of sounds funny, doesn't it? Collective control of society, the more we become, you can do we or our here, the more individuals is always a safer bet. So those kind of things will help you get a more sophisticated concept across. So hopefully that is making sense. Just to quickly jump back to the questions, to the chat. Can you tell me if this short answer will get me full marks? Yes, let me just make sure I've finished going through this whole thing here, but anyone who is jumping online always gets priority in terms of what they want looked at. I think we've covered a whole lot here. I've helped you with the structure. We said ideally aim for 4 sentences. Make sure you've got some, make sure in your first sentence you are trying to attack both key terms of the question if there are 2 main ones. Like collective here is kind of secondary because it's just the type of experience, whereas poverty and political ignorance are so specific. They're a real specific focal point of the question that you don't want to group them together, but you want to talk about a relationship between them. And that's what we've just broken down here with these examples. So get a relationship between the key terms in the opening sentence. Make sure that relationship makes sense to you and something that actually links to the arguments and the evidence that you have prepared and that you want to make. So that's important. When you go on to expand on your introduction and reference, you should be referencing context and form a little bit more specifically throughout. This one doesn't do that. Make sure you are referencing the text at times, but also being super clear in terms of what you're talking about. So if you say physical poverty, be clear with what you mean by that, because it's not always easy to just assume what you mean. And finally, make sure that you finish strong with a concept. Try to avoid finishing with such a specific textual reference, and aim to try and impress the marker by having some kind of paradox, anomaly, inconsistency element there that ties in with the module. That would be for the common module only, but if you can have something that's going to give you a bit of an edge, that always helps. Okay, so there's that breakdown. Let's have a look at, is there a 3 marker? Airstriker wants a short answer reviewed. Will you get full marks? Will you get 3 out of 3 for your short answer? Have you submitted that? Do you want to just put it in the chat? Let me know how you want me to assess that, because we've got a lot of submissions that have come through. But before I go, I will have a look at that. If you want to submit that, if you're still here, Airstriker123, excuse me, put it in the chat. I need a quick way to access it, and then I can give you that validation, hopefully, that you would get 3 out of 3. I can never say for sure, but I can tell you with a pretty high degree of certainty whether you've kind of ticked the boxes for a 3 out of 3 or a 4 out of 4 and so forth with short answer. Do you want to just send each sentence? Just send hopefully it's not more than 4 sentences, but a 3 marker only needs to be 3 sentences. So for anyone who's thinking about, how long does my 3 marker have to be for a short answer response? 3 sentences. Just put each of your sentences in the chat. Airstriker shouldn't be deleting it if you do that. I assume that's just because of word count, but just do each sentence. If it's 5 sentences, it's 5. But more sentences doesn't necessarily equate to more marks. Okay, there's obviously a minimum length that is expected, but it's more quality versus quantity. A lot of students waste sentences when they do short answers. They just add sentences because they feel like that'll help me get another mark. But if you don't have all the elements there, if every sentence only does half of what it's meant to do, you're going to end up with 0. You don't accrue half marks just because you did half of what was required each time. Okay, so this should be fun. We're just going to do this live on the chat. I'm just going to have a look at this without even having a look at the text. I'm going to assume that you've got, some merit to your points here. But let's see how we go. Text 5 explores the contradictory experiences. I do need to see the question as well. Sorry, have you put the question in there? So shoot through the question as well. Maybe we'll look at that first, Airstriker, because I'll only be able to tell you if you get the marks each time if you've actually answered the question. So let's have a look at that. Here's the question. Analyze how text 5 explores the contradictory experiences of the past and present. Okay. So what are the key words? Or usually with a short answer question, especially a 3-marker, you're just focusing on one word. I mean, here it's kind of like past, present, contradictory. What is contradictory? We're looking for something that is opposing, something that's different, that contrasts between past and present. You only need to give us one insight on that in the topic sentence, and then you can provide evidence of what the experience from the past is, and then evidence of what the experience from the present is to prove that there is a contradiction there. Okay, there needs to be something conflicting in this. Let's see if you've proven that or made that claim. Text 5 explores the contradictory experiences of past and present. So you've started by restating the question, which is fine as long as afterwards you are going to actually tell me what the contradiction is before you bring in evidence. Text 5 explores the contradictory experiences of past and present. So to be clear, you've just repeated the question up to this point, so no marks. Through its use, now you're telling me how, through its use of strong visual imagery and ability to use juxtaposition. So you've told me 2 techniques that have helped the text prove the contradiction, but I still don't know what the contradiction is. You haven't introduced the contradiction. You've repeated the most important part of your first sentence is repetition of the question, and then you've listed a couple of techniques which I would typically avoid in the first sentence, the topic sentence. So we're trying to state what the contradiction is. What I mean by that is text 5 explores the contradictory experiences between past and present by contrasting X and Y. Like, you haven't given me that actual contradiction. Or you could say text 5 explores a contradiction between the something of the past, nostalgia of the past. I'm making things up here as an example. Nostalgia of the past and the optimism or reality and a more kind of grim or bleak reality of the present. So if you compare like the emotions, maybe the more joyful emotions of nostalgia, the joyous experience of the nostalgia of the past, with a more bleak perception of the present, depends what the contradiction is, then that allows you to actually have that contrast. But you haven't specified that in the first sentence. So far, you still have more work to do to get your first mark, because just by listing 2 techniques in the topic sentence, that hasn't earned you a mark. So it's on 0 at the moment. And I'm just going to call it blunt because I really want to help you. I'm just going to tell you how it is so that you can actually make sure you don't waste a sentence. That first sentence is wasted at the moment because you should be bringing in the visual imagery and juxtaposition in the next sentences where you do your analysis. This is first evident in, I wish everything would be the way they are at this moment. Conveying, so that, where's the technique for that? You've put the technique in the topic sentence, whereas you should have put the technique in this sentence. So instead of saying this is first evident in I wish everything, if you're going to talk about, let's see, conveying how the protagonist, I mean, if you're doing juxtaposition here, I mean, what technique? I wish everything would be the way they are at this moment. I mean, I wish, it's a very high modality kind of expression. I'm just thinking of a technique you can attach to that. You always want to have a technique. Otherwise, you're not satisfying that component, because in your topic sentence, I don't know which technique you're applying to which quote. Conveying how the protagonist would like to change. Okay. Whilst opposing in these things never again is high modality. So these juxtaposition of high modal expressions, or high modal kind of assertions that this protagonist or persona wants things to be the way they are right now, versus these things never happen to good people like us. I'm still not following what the contradiction is. Is that the whole sentence? Yeah, it needs the technique in there, and it's not clear in that sentence how you're linking it to the question. If that full stop is the end of that first sentence, where do you reference the past or the present? Every sentence in a short answer response has to at least reference one of the key terms in the question. yes, to establish a contradiction, it might take 2 sentences to show the opposing views, but you should at least make it clear which thing is the past, which thing is the present. I should see those actual words. I want you to focus on including the actual words every sentence, so you're forced to respond to the question. So I'm still not convinced yet on this. Maybe between this one and the next sentence, you can get a mark. Let's have a look. Further reinforced. Try not to use further reinforced, okay? Because that means you're going to repeat the same point. You're reinforcing. Tell me something additional. Tell me something new. Just use a word like moreover for that, or by contrast if you're talking about a contradiction. You've got to be careful with your word in here because you don't want to make it sound like you're just saying the same thing. Further reinforced in, and now she's alone. Again, you don't have techniques. Further reinforced in quote. You need to lead with the technique, then the quote. Find quotes that have a technique in the first place. Don't put yourself into a corner by choosing quotes that you're thinking, I have no idea what the technique is for that. Is this the visual imagery thing? You referred to visual imagery in the topic sentence, and we haven't seen where it is. Further reinforced in, and now she's alone. That's a short sentence there. And now she's alone. Short syntax. Write that down if you're taking notes on this. So further reinforced by, but let's do it better. Moreover, the short syntax, lead with the technique, every sentence of analysis. You're not going to get marked down for doing that structure. It's about how you connect it to the question. But you will get marked down if you haven't made the technique clear. So why not just do it the easy way? Moreover, the short syntax in, and now she's alone, thrust into a world she does not want to be in. I mean, technically you got truncated syntax because the sentence is kind of broken up into pieces. But you could just do, and now she's alone, because and now she's alone is a great quote. So good selection, good evidence selection, because that relates to the present. And now present, she's alone. Good quote for the question. And the quote there, short quotes are great. Moreover, in the short syntax, and now she's alone, where's the effect? Here you go. Demonstrating how the text uses contradictory experiences from wanting things to stay the same to hating her life as a method to storytell, to shape the audience's emotions. So you kind of lost me there at the end. As a method to storytell, to shape the audience's emotions. Kind of the direct effect of her saying, you haven't really nailed the effect of that quote. Because to me, if I was just using, and now she's alone, where have you analyzed the alone part? Focus on the word that you can really get some, squeeze out some meaning from. And now she's alone, demonstrating the protagonist, or whoever this is, the protagonist's sense of social alienation. Alone, social isolation. Alone means isolated. Alone means alienation. Use those words when you're explaining the effect to show the marker that you're actually analyzing the quote at hand. You're being a little bit too vague when you actually say what the meaning is. Okay, because you just say how the text uses contradictory experiences from wanting things to stay the same to hating her life. Yes, there's a point there. How the text uses, but you haven't really given us an insight into that. You're just saying that there is a contradiction between wanting things to stay the same as the past. You just need to add the words of the question in to make it clearer how you're making points here. Okay, that demonstrates how the text, it doesn't demonstrate how the text, it demonstrates, let's cut the how the text bit out, like, how the text uses, and just go demonstrating, in addition to what I said before about the alienation, because she's dissatisfied with the present, it demonstrates a contradiction, to come back to the question, between the speaker persona protagonist's desire to remain the same as the past. You need to get the past back in there for things to stay the same as the past, right? Her desire to preserve the past with her discontentment for the present. And it's like you've linked everything together then, but you haven't just repeated the words of the question. Use the words of the question a lot, but expand on them. So we said a desire to maintain, preserve the past. That's adding something to the question, because you're saying we want to preserve the past. The question just said past and present. You're saying preserve the past, discontentment with the present. Those little words will give you the mark each time and allow you to better respond to it. For anyone tuning in here, just going through an example of a 3-mark response. So, in my mind, and I want to be blunt about this to help you prepare, right? Your topic sentence didn't get a mark because it didn't actually answer the question. You didn't introduce what type of contradiction you were going to talk about. After reading this, it sounds like you should have said something along the lines of, the text represents a contradiction, the contradictory experiences between dissatisfaction with the present and a desire for, or a desire or a longing for the past. Just adding the longing and a discontentment, a couple of words around past and present there, that would get you the mark at the start. But because that wasn't there and you just introduced some techniques, and then you didn't have the techniques in the other sentences, it kind of got a bit fragmented and it wasn't quite precise enough and it wasn't clear enough in terms of the connection to the question. So takeaways for, so coming back to the mark, I could only give that 1 mark just based on the last part because you haven't made it clear what the techniques were throughout. You just introduced them. So you did say juxtaposition, I think, in this last one, did you? Not really there. I mean, you would struggle because you've front loaded the techniques whereas you should have used the techniques every time you introduce the quote or the analysis. So remember to, it's 0 to 1 out of 3 for me in this response. And I'm just being trying to be helpful here. It's 0 to 1, but you could so easily turn this into a 3. Clear a topic sentence. Don't mention any techniques. I know the question says how. That's why you have the other sentences to do that. One clear topic sentence that breaks down those keywords of the question in one specific way. Discontentment for the present. Desire for the past. That's literally all you had to put in there and you'll get the mark for that one. Lead with the technique in the other sentences of analysis so you're not just saying quotes. The short syntax. Short quotes are great. The high modality. I never want to, right? Start with the technique, then the quote, and then say how it connects to the question and make sure you're focusing on the actual words of the quote. Like, what was the example we looked at before? Excuse me. Excuse me. And now she's alone. We focus on that word alone and we look for a related term. Excuse me. So we look for a word like isolation or alienation because that's like a synonym or a related term for alone. And then that's the word you can use to connect back to the question when you explain the meaning. If you just tick those few boxes that we just covered, then you'll get the 3 out of 3. At the moment, it's borderline 1. It's possibly a 0. So it's those few tweaks that will lift you to a 3 out of 3. Jump onto the next live stream and present me another 3-mark response to a different question, and let's see if you have implemented those. So anyone watching this, we're going to be following, cheering for Airstriker 3 out of 3 in the next one. I want you to come back in the next chat, in the next live stream, post your new 3-mark answer with the question, and let's go through that together. Let's build you up. Let's go from 0/1 to a 3 out of 3. Get you 100%, and you can apply that to every question and get yourself 20 out of 20. It's one of the easiest sections to go from a low mark to full marks. I guarantee you just need to learn the formula. Make sure you watch Jeddle's videos on YouTube for how to answer the 3 markers. Type in how to answer a 3-mark question. I literally will break it down step by step. Thanks for making free videos. Thank you so much. Appreciate the feedback, guys. Hope you're enjoying these. Hope you're enjoying the live streams and also, of course, the big library of videos we have. And obviously, if you want further analysis, go to Jeddle.com. There are our most in-depth resources on there for you to prepare for the exams. How do you come up with a Mod C imaginative idea for a prepared draft that is adaptable, especially if you're not that naturally creative? That's a great question, Caleb. To be honest, I struggled with the creative element when I was going through year 12 and doing these, trying to generate these pieces. And to be honest, I just had to put in a bit more work in terms of the research and thinking about, what's a creative angle on something that I can implement. You don't have to come up with the most amazing unique idea. No one's coming up with original ideas as such from scratch. People draw from other ideas. People draw from other concepts. So what I would suggest you do is think about your prescribed text and think about what would be an interesting twist or an interesting take on that original idea. So you're looking at the prescribed text. Maybe it's about, a son who's visiting his father and he's having these memories of, maybe they got a fractured relationship and he's having flashbacks. Maybe you do a little twist on that, and it's not that different. That's fine. It's more about how you're writing the piece than the idea itself. So how do you come up with a monthly imaginative that is adaptable? The most adaptable pieces are often, I'll give you a few tips for how to be adaptable. If you plan out the response in a way where it's based very closely on some of the ideas of a prescribed text that you've looked at, so it has a connection with the prescribed text, and you just do a twist on that, that's generally going to be a good starting point for you, especially if you're struggling to come up with a different idea. But one of the most adaptable ideas the ways to be adaptable is an idea that's to do with the creative process itself. So a kind of meta fictional angle, meaning try and write about the craft of writing. That's what a lot of the prescribed texts feature anyway. They'll have someone talking about their creative process. You might write about someone having writer's block. You might write about someone thinking about where do ideas come from? Like Caleb, you might say, I'm not that naturally creative. So are you saying to me there's two types of writers? There's the naturals, and then there's the whatever the other type you would call is. Whether it doesn't have to be the fakes, it could be natural, and then it could be the the people who really have to slog it out and learn it, and you come up with a label for that. And if you were doing a discursive piece, then that would be your discussion. Okay, there are these types of writers, and that is there's the type of writer who comes up with ideas like that. This is where the ideas come from. Here are some examples. And then there are these other types of writers. So if you wanted to do a discursive, you could do that kind of idea. If you were doing that in an imaginative format, excuse me, you could also have that idea kind of play out in a very short narrative. So don't have too many things happen in an imaginative, because the more things there are, the less adaptable it is. You should have one key moment as a setting, as a parameter for your piece. Try and focus on one key setting, one key moment, about 5 minutes of real time. And within that moment, explore attention, because pretty much every stimulus is going to connect to some kind of tension. Someone wants something but can't get it. Someone is faced with a choice, a difficult choice. There's some kind of problem or dilemma. So put us right in the mix with that dilemma straight away. The idea might be to do with writing itself. So you might be writing about, it's an imaginative about someone exploring their mind for ideas. That could be the concept. Okay, paint a picture of someone's mind. That's interesting, right? That's pretty creative. If you can say, I went into my mind, and then you use a metaphor for the mindscape, the landscape of the mind, and then you're kind of using a metaphor generally for like you trying to find it. Like maybe it's a wilderness, or maybe it's like maybe it's wilderness, maybe it's this like outdoor setting where you are looking for something. Maybe you're in a maze, maybe your mind is a maze and you're trying to find that creative source. And the imaginative piece is you in this maze, like the maze runner kind of concept. And that's where you draw from ideas, right? The maze runner, if you know that one, like you go into this maze and you're looking for this source of inspiration. And it's like this little metaphorical piece. And it's all about how can you find a creative idea? The creative idea is represented by some kind of made up object or item. You can give that a name. And yeah, you're just exploring yourself, running through the maze of your mind, trying to find a creative idea. And before you know it, your metaphorical narrative of someone searching through a maze for some particular thing that represents an idea is the creative piece itself, and you're done. Now, because that ties into the search for creativity, and you're presenting this metaphorical maze of this someone, you running through your own brain trying to find that idea, that's going to be highly adaptable because a lot of stimuli will relate to that concept of writing and where to, how to be creative. So does that make sense, Caleb, if you're still on here? I mean, that's just literally off the top of my head. But it's about, kind of reflecting your own experience here. You're like, I'm not that naturally creative. Well, let's write a story about someone searching through a maze, because that means it's not easy to find some creative idea. I'm picturing like Harry Potter. I don't know which one it is, but where they're searching for, where they have to go through that maze, and like the kind of corridors are all closing in on them, and that guy, Robert Pattinson, whoever his character is, I think he dies during it. So I'm just picturing those scenes, and I would literally just write a very short moment in time of you in that maze, and really focus on the figurative language, the imagery. Make sure all the descriptions are reflecting the internal state of you or your character. And yeah, you don't have to write about a lot of things happening. You just have to make your setting clear, make it clear how you're feeling, use the imagery around you to reflect your experience. And then, you've got your metaphor for the creative struggle, just like that. Okay. So yeah, that hopefully gives you a bit of a guideline. In terms of practicing for trials, I have to jump off, so I'll come back to that question about trial preparation. I mean, by next week, we're really getting close for a lot of people, a lot of students. You're probably at that 6 week mark, 6 to 7 week. I'm going to go through a plan with you all. I'm actually going to set up a webinar. Maybe we'll add it to the description of this video. So check back onto this video if you are interested in joining a webinar to prepare for your trials, where we literally go through every section of the exam. Let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in that. A webinar breaking down every section of the exam. How do you prepare for each one? How do you prepare 6 weeks out? I'm going to run that webinar. It'll be exclusive to the people who click on it at first. So you got to sign up for that one. We'll put a notice out, and we'll put something under this description. I'll get someone to put that there. Is it free? I think the webinar, that's a good question. I think we were going to charge for it because then we get people filling up the spots that don't attend. If we charge for it, it's going to be $10. It will not be more than $10. Let me double check. I think I will put a $10 fee on it, so it's not a lot of money, but also it's, I would run it for free. I've done it in the past, and then you only get 50% of the people attending because they're like, well, it's free. Of course, I'm going to put my name down. So transparently, that's why it's not kind of a money grab kind of thing here. But I'm probably only do it for 100 spots, $10, and we'll run that for you. We'll put a notice out soon. Send me an email. Send us an email if you're interested in getting onto that, because we've got a pretty big email list at this point. And let's see here. And if you're really keen to join and you can't afford it, send the email, say hello@jeddle.com. Don't have money to pay for the webinar, but I'd love to join. If you actually are going to attend, then shoot me a message, and we'll give you you won't have to pay for it. As I said, it's more just to make sure we're filling it up with people who want to be there. So yeah, it'll be free for you, Airstriker, and anyone else who can't afford it, just shoot us an email. If you can afford it, we'll put the money back into some high quality YouTube videos on the other side of things. So it'll be going to good use anyway. Oh yeah, so Path to Peace. So is there any place to get feedback online? Well, that's why we made JeddAI. Now with JeddAI, you've got to know how to use it. But if you go to Jeddle.com and look at the JeddAI tab, which is the marking and feedback tool, if you sign up to that as a student, then we have a team of experts who will mark your responses. So you could do a few short answers, get them to look at your short answer responses, tell you if you got 3 out of 3, 2 out of 3. Close to trials, that's one of the best tools to have, because you're getting access to actual teachers, tutors, people who can give you a pretty good indication of where you're at. So sign up to JeddAI.com. That's the feedback tool, and that will help you get access to that. You can get instant feedback. We have tools that are calibrated to the HSC rubrics so that you can get a sense of where you're at grade-wise for your responses. We've trained it on different responses, band 6, band 5, etc. So yeah, JeddAI will have that, and then you can use that. So I don't think I can buy it. I don't think my parents can buy it. Does ChatGPT work? I mean, GPT is it's got the LLM. I mean, we're tapping into these LLMs, whatever is the best result, right? The problem with GPT is it's very generic, and the prompting has to be quite precise to get the best output from it. So that's why we've already done all that work and put it all into a system where you can just get immediate relevant feedback. ChatGPT can work if you give it the right prompts and you feed it the right rubrics. There's a bit of a setup involved each time, but you can start a thread and do it on there for sure. It also just means like you're not getting real human feedback as well. Like that's why we have the team to kind of give you the assurance, like, yeah, this actually would get the marks in an exam. Okay, so I use your resources. I was wondering, how did you start this business? Hey, Jim, great question. Thanks for using the resources, first of all. Super appreciated. You mean like on the channel or even on the website? Always great to hear when we've got people using it. Hopefully it's helpful. But yeah, how did we start the business? I started it, it's probably like 7 years ago now. Been in the game a while, but I've been tutoring and teaching the HSC for 12 years. So deep into the game, but 7 years ago, was doing a lot of group workshops. We would tutoring and lecturing hundreds of students at once sometimes. So from there, we started building some resources. We said, let's get everything online. And then we started working with teachers and former high achievers, like students who got full marks in the HSC, VCE for Victoria. We started teaming up with teachers and students who knew how to show you exactly what it took to get the marks. And then we put together all of those resources, put it into one online platform. And obviously with the YouTube channel, we just recorded a lot of content, myself included, and tried to put that out to help as many students as possible. So yeah, created a platform over time, working with a lot of different teachers and former students to consolidate the resources, and then have really worked on putting out a lot of free content on YouTube and the socials. And yeah, we work with a lot of schools now as well. It's not just individual students, but we work with schools. And for the last 2 to 3 years, we've been working on JeddAI as probably the most effective, most helpful AI-based marking feedback tool for students. So it gives you the most relevant feedback for your specific exams. It's got lots of teacher tools on there as well. So yeah, that's kind of the journey so far. Lots of other components in terms of how we built it, but we started it very naturally, right? I've always been a tutor and always loved teaching and learning, so just got into it very organically. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. Hey, if you can do me a favor, if anyone's used the resources or you got any value from these videos or anything to do with Jeddle, please do leave a review, our Google review. That would be super helpful. I've got to make more of a push for that because it gets kind of quiet on there. So if you guys can leave us a Google review, if you've enjoyed the resources, let me just find our page here. I'll put the link in there. If you guys can jump to it, would be super appreciated. Let's see. It's a good start when I can't even find out my own review on Google. I'm gonna have to find that and really locate that. But if you guys can leave us a review if you go onto Google, that would be appreciated. I can't believe that it's not good. Our SEO, we need to work on this SEO, it seems. Yeah, because for now, struggling to find that. That's all right. Any way you can, leave some positive feedback, and if you've got value from it, of course. Otherwise, we'll see you guys Oh, Everett, look this. It's hard for me to say no to other questions that come up. I'm going to save the big answers to do with trial prep and all of that, as I said, for the webinar and other live streams, just because I'm out of time. But you can ask a quick question. I'm not going to go on that note. So yeah, let me know. I'll hang around for a few minutes to answer any other questions that you have on this. You still there, Everett? Hope I'm saying your name correctly. What are the best themes for Hagseed Tempest? So just quickly, if I gave you a broad framework, themes are very broad terms, right? Like I'll give you some pointers. So if we think about the essay in two halves, if you think about the text in two halves or the conversation in two halves, we would think about the problem and the solution. Okay, so what would be a problem theme? Problem theme would be the experience of imprisonment that the characters have across both texts. So then I would have imprisonment as the category for the first half of my essay. And then I would have freedom as the second half of the essay. Now, don't just write those words and say, the text explore imprisonment and freedom. But if you think about the text in two halves as concerns around imprisonment and then a desire for freedom and how you get there, that gives you a structure that you can then use to get more specific and explore the differences and the similarities between the texts in how they explore those themes. Okay, so remember, the word imprisonment, the word freedom, that's not the only thing you say when you're introducing the ideas of the text. You need to actually say something about imprisonment. Are they psychologically imprisoned, physically imprisoned? Why? How? How do they become free? In both texts, or in each text, there's a slightly different approach to it because obviously their contexts are different. So, for instance, for Prospero, he's physically exiled. He's literally exiled to an island, right? He's banished, and he experiences that level of imprisonment in a very physical dimension, right? And also metaphysical as well. There's spirits and magic being performed. But then when you go to Hagseed, that kind of, even though I should actually twist it the other way. Prospero goes to an island. He's literally exiled, but and physically imprisoned by the island. But the island itself is not an actual prison. Okay. Then we fast forward to Hagseed, and in Hagseed, there's a literal prison. But funnily enough, the literal prison is just to make it obvious. It's to make it realist because it has realism to it. It's to make it obvious how Prospero was imprisoned. Because if someone thought about Prospero on an island, there's not an obvious imprisonment, and yet all of those metaphorical layers in the Tempest are made more explicit in Hagseed through the literal, realist depiction of an actual prison. Okay, and then so you can explore that, but then you can also explore how, despite the setting being a literal prison in Hagseed, the type of imprisonment is more emotional and psychological for Felix. Okay, so his battle has become more internal, whereas it was more of an external battle in the Tempest. So why has that changed? Because of context. So if you think about Hagseed, if you think about contemporary society, okay, then, and I'd appreciate the feedback, suppose on Switch. If you think about contemporary society with Hagseed, we're a lot more psychoanalytic. So we have this psychoanalytical paradigm brought on by people like Freud and, who are the other big ones? Carl Jung. So this kind of Jungian, Freudian psychoanalysis has defined much of the way we think about people's issues, right? And they have an issue, it's a projection of your psyche, it's all about what's going on in your head and your heart, right? So that projection of your interior experience is something that is emphasized more in Hagseed. So again, it's all imprisonment, but the way they're being imprisoned is different because it's reflecting different contextual values. Yeah, spots on Switch. That would be amazing. If you could email me, I got to maximize these given I can't find my Google review page at the moment. That's amazing. Your Hagseed analysis is going to be 20 out of 20. Incredible. There it is. So are you able to email me that? If you can email me a testimonial, anyone else who the channel has helped and you're happy to be on the website even as a student testimonial, chuck through a quote, even a photo of if you got a headshot that you're happy to share. Otherwise, you don't have to use that. But if you can email through a testimonial to the hello@jeddle.com, just put your name on it. Let me know you're happy for us to use it. Then that would be amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being on here. As I said, if you've got any positive reviews or testimonials, email them to hello@jeddle.com. If you can do that now, that would be even better because I tend to forget these things. So I'll put a little link here for whoever is able to do that. For whoever is kind enough to send that through, would really appreciate it. And thank you very much. Have a good night. Good luck with your studies. And let's chat soon. I'll speak to you all, I'm sure, next week. Tuesday, 7:30 is always the goal time. If I'm ever not on there, it's because something has come up that I cannot get around. But 7:30 Tuesday is always the target. And then we'll have that webinar. We'll shoot out some notifications on that. Make sure you're following on Instagram, on the socials, because that's where we'll post a lot of the updates. So Jeddle, ask Jeddle on Instagram. We will let you know of the webinar and future events in preparation for the trials and the HSA. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.